Well, the Safe Third Country Agreement is being challenged in federal court this hour, and that agreement has to do with Canada's border pact with the United States that prohibits people from claiming asylum here if they cross the border at official entry points. At issue today, whether the U.S. is indeed still safe for asylum seekers. And for more, let's go to Habiba Noshin. She is standing outside the courthouse in Toronto, where proceedings are just about to get underway. So Habiba, nice to have you on the program. This is, I have to say, a controversial border agreement. Take us through the case and the arguments being made here.
So this agreement was essentially went into effect in 2004, and what it says is that when a claimant makes their way into the U.S., the second they've stepped foot in it, that's where they'll be forced to make their claim. And then if they try to cross over to make their claim in Canada, they'll be sent back, because the argument is that if a refugee is truly fearful of his or her life, they will be making their claim in the first safe place that they land or they arrive at. And what that agreement has essentially meant is it's closed the borders for a lot of asylum seekers who would perhaps want to make their way to Canada to access its court system for a refugee claim, but they're prevented from doing so under this agreement. So it's really stopped the flow of traffic from the U.S. to Canada in large numbers. So if this agreement was to be done away with, that we would likely see a lot of asylum seekers making their claim in Canada. And some argue that that might collapse the refugee system, because we are able to maintain an orderly system here in Canada, because the number of people who are eventually making their claim is quite limited because of this agreement that's in place with the U.S.
So quite limited, but
at the center of the argument, yeah.
Sorry,
and
go
the
ahead.
reason being that the argument that the government has made is that the U.S. is a safe place, and it's at par with the Canadian system for refugees, and therefore if you arrive in Canada or you arrive in the U.S., your chances are pretty good that you'll get a fair hearing. But the claimants are arguing today that that is in fact not the case, that especially given the events in recent years, that the U.S. Is no longer a safe country for refugees, and that Canada should do away with this agreement.
Mm-hmm. So again, that's the central issue here, whether or not the U.S. is still actually safe for refugee claims, Canada being a signatory to the International Refugee Treaty. But you know, this is not the first time that this agreement has faced a legal challenge. So walk us through what we know happened in the past here.
That's right. So in previous years, from 2007 to 2009, this issue was taken up by the Canadian courts. There were two things that, and ultimately held up, and there were two significant differences between that case and this case. In the first case, the courts decided that one of the flaws of that case was that it was the claim was being made by a group of human rights activists, and not necessarily the claimant, the refugee claimants themselves, who would be affected by this. That's different in this time around. This time, the human rights organization are partnered with a claimant who is actually trying to access the Canadian courts. The second difference is that the recent events across the border, Trump administration has been openly hostile towards asylum seekers, and I think that will make it quite easy for the refugee advocates to make their claim that the U.S. is in fact not a safe country for asylum seekers.
Okay, Habiba, thank you. We'll be watching the case. Appreciate this.